Hello everybody, I'm Corin Tomlinson from Greenwood Bonsai Studio in Nottingham. In this video I want to show you some group plantings or forest planting bonsai, and we're going to create one for you. I brought a couple of examples in to show you, if I can show you these to start off with. All these groups here are Japanese maple, but different types of Japanese maple. This large group here on the left is Acer palmatum capsura. It's a type of Japanese maple that has got a very bright orange leaf in spring. This group has been planted together for 30 years. My father, Harry Tomlinson, planted this group together many years ago, and it is now in our care here at Greenwood Bonsai. So this one here was 30 years ago. I've got a photograph of it here that was taken about 5 years ago. And a photograph of it here when it's in full leaf in early spring. You can see the magnificent spring colour that it shows. This next group on the right hand side is an Acer palmatum Dishojo, and it's grown for its bright red leaf. This is a group that I put together about 15 years ago. And here's a photograph of it when I first put the group together. And here's a photograph of it in spring with a bright red leaf. So we've got a group here that's been together for 30 years that my father did. We've got a group here that's been together for 15 years that I put together. And here on the left, we've got a group that's been together for 15 minutes. And in this video, I'm going to show you how I created this group just a little while ago. Okay, so I'm in the studio, going to do a maple group planting, forest planting for you today. So this comprises of a number of things. Firstly, we need a good bonsai pot to do this with, and we need some suitable plant material. The pot that I've chosen is this shallow oval in an ivory cream glaze. This glaze has been chosen because it's a nice colour against the leaf of the tree, both in spring when you've got bright, fresh spring growth, and in autumn when the trees are going to go orange and red. I've already put some mesh into the pot to cover the drainage holes, so the pot's already prepared for the group planting. So that's the pot we're going to be using today. And then the trees that we're going to be using are this selection of trees here, Japanese maples, about 4 to 5 year old. I bought them last year and they were quite tall, and we've just cut them down and we've let the branches grow out for another year. And in that year, they will have also produced some roots, and they've now got a fairly compact, good root system. When you're putting trees together for a group or forest planting, ideally, you want a compact root system. You want enough root, but you don't want too much. If this was a solid matter root, it just takes a lot of time to comb it all out, and it's a lot more effort. Also, when we're placing these in the pot in a little time, we'll sometimes need to get the trees quite close together. And if we've got a quite compact root system, it allows us to do that. There's certain things we're looking for when we're doing a group planting, when we're selecting the trees. All these trees here are from the same batch. So although they're seedlings, and you will get natural variation of leaf with maples, they're all quite similar. We've also got a range of sizes, so we go from sort of this sort of size tree, which is probably one of the, could be a main tree, a more dominant tree, down to this sort of size that can be a smaller tree, maybe towards the rear of the group. So it's important to get a nice batch of trees with some different size and trunk thickness to them. Also, it's the most important thing with a group, and it's a luxury that I have here, is to have more trees than you need. If you're going to do a group of 9 trees and you go to a nursery or garden centre and you buy 9 trees, it's very difficult to put them together and make it look right. You get towards the end of the group and you'll want one that's a bit taller, a bit shorter, a bit thinner, a bit fatter, you know, or a bit straighter or a bit curvier. So we're lucky that I've got a selection of trees here, so I've almost got an infinite number of trees and I can select from them. It makes it a lot easier. So the first thing to do really regarding doing this group planting is I'm going to select some of these trees and we're going to just go through and comb all the roots out on them so I can then select them quite easily when I come to do the group planting. So there's a few things we need to think of when we're doing this group planting. We've got suitable trees, we already know that. We've got enough of them, we've got a suitable pot. When I put my groups together, I tend to get all the trees prepared, so the actual assembling the group, the creative process, is really quite fast-paced and quite short. Yeah? Now, I know you've probably all seen videos where people spend a lot of time wiring trees in when they do a group, and I think if you're using like akadama and soils like that, it is necessary. But I've got a slightly different method of doing this. I tend to use a more basic peat-based compost when I do the initial group planting. It's heavier in weight and it means that we don't have to bother wiring the trees in. Because when you're wiring the trees in, I do find it interrupts the flow of creating the group and becomes a bit more of a nuisance. So most groups here that I do in the UK, I'll plant them into our basic bonsai compost mix and they'll stay in that for 2 to 3 years. In 2 to 3 years time, once the roots have meshed together as a whole, then I would take the group planting out and I would root prune it, and at that time I might pot it back in to akadama, but I don't do it on initial styling. Okay, so we'll take a tree, suitable one. So we'll probably start off with essentially this tallest one that we showed you earlier, and I'm just going to knock it out of pots like that. And then the preparation work on something like this is just to use a root hook and just comb all the soil away from the base of the trunk. So these were potted about a year ago, so let's see what the roots are like on them, how much they've grown within that year. So just comb it out with a root hook and we can knock a bit of that soil off, look. And the preparation of these trees is what takes the time. So once we've got the tree like this, a few of these roots that are growing up and a bit untidy we can take back. And then we want to take some of the depth of root back as well. So some of these that are a little bit growing down like this, we can trim. This particular one has got a bit of a knuckle at the bottom here, but that shouldn't be an issue. I think we'll be all right for depth wise. Just brush the base there just to tidy it up. So initially with this sort of thing, we're just going to get the trees out and prepare them to this sort of standard, and then we can select from this batch here. So we'll just wander off for a few minutes and we'll get that work done, and I'll see you back in a few moments time. Okay, so we've spent a little bit of time combing all these trees out. So we've combed the roots out, look, and just to get a smaller, more compact root system, we've given them a little bit of a trim, just so we've got a tinier root like that, so we can put them together in the pot a little bit easier. And for a size pot like this, I would estimate I might be doing maybe 15 or so trees into this group planting. We've actually had a count and we've bare rooted about 35, so I've got plenty to choose from. I always line them up on a table like this. We've got them in an arc, and we've got the largest trees here on my right hand side, sort of kind of middle ones in the middle, and then the smaller ones here. And that helps me when I'm doing the group, because I can start selecting these larger trees and then I can work my way across the table, doing the medium ones, and finally adding the smaller ones. We need different sized trees because we're trying to create a natural looking group planting. And normally when you see forests, you'll get the older trees, the ones that have got a bit more light and they've grown a bit quicker. And then around them you get shorter trees, a little bit skinnier, haven't grown quite so much. But in the bonsai composition, there's a bit more to it than that, because we're wanting to create the impression of depth and perspective. And of course, in the open landscape, if you're looking at a big forest, you get perspective because it could be several hundreds of meters in depth. But here, we've got a pot here, you know, that's like 40 centimetres in depth. So we need to create that illusion of depth and perspective within a very small space. So that's why we need the smaller trees to allow us to do that. So now we've got them all lined up like this, the next thing I do, we'll put some compost into the pot and we can try to arrange the trees. There's quite a few common mistakes people make when they're planting groups together. First of all, I prefer an oval pot, although I do groups in rectangular pots. In a rectangular pot, you do have a bit more dead space in the corners and it can be a bit more difficult to use. So an oval pot like this, if you haven't done a group planting before, you'll probably find it easier to start off in an oval pot. We don't want to cram too many trees in this pot, but at the same time, we don't want to put too few trees in the pot. There'll be a sort of optimum amount so that we get a nice density to this group, you know, and it doesn't look like we've skimped on the number of trees, but it also doesn't look like they're all huddled together. Okay, so we want somewhere in between. And one of the things you'll read about group plantings, you'll commonly read that you have to put groups together of odd numbers of trees. Traditionally in Japan, you know, they tend to use odd numbers, a group of 7 trees, a group of 9 or 13. I think in reality, putting together like 4 trees or 6 trees is more difficult to put it together asymmetrically and not make it look too static. But for my own taste, once you get over 13 trees, 15 trees, it becomes less of an issue. Because when you look at the group planting, when it's finally done, like this one here, you don't necessarily think how many trees are in that. You're just looking at it and admiring the beauty. And if you like that group planting, it looks beautiful to you, you shouldn't have to count how many trees are in it to decide whether it's a nice image or not. Okay. So what we'll do, we'll get our compost. And like I said, this is our regular bonsai compost. And this is a mistake that quite a few people make when they do groups. They've got the pot, they've got the trees, they get all excited, they start picking trees up, yeah, and positioning them in the pot and trying to decide where to put them. And the trouble with that is they don't stand up because they haven't got any soil around them. And also, you're just placing them in the bottom of the pot. So some of these trees, we might want to place them a bit taller. For instance, say we've got 2 trees here that are the same sort of height. If we want this one to be taller, we might bring this one up onto some soil, or we might put this one on the bottom of the pot, or even vice versa. So you want to have some soil in the bottom of the pot so that it allows you to manipulate them a little bit more. So, and as I said before, we use a fairly heavy peat, grit and John Innes number 2 mixture I'm using for this, which means I don't have to wire the trees in. This should hold them up and support them. If you find it isn't doing, and it's a bit more difficult, then you can always moisten this compost down. Obviously that's going to make it heavier and it's going to stop them trees falling around. Now some of you are thinking, oh, he's putting too much soil in there. You know, that's common. A lot of people don't fill the pots up as much as this, but I like to put a decent amount of soil in to start off with, so that we can mound some of the trees up. We don't want the surface of the pot to look really flat like a bowling green, but we also don't want it to make it look like the trees are planted on top of a molehill. We want somewhere in between. If you look at this one here, this pot is relatively shallow, about 25 mil. But the depth at this highest point to the bottom of the pot, you know, could be like 150 mil. So you do have depth even in a shallow pot because you've got the greater length, yeah? So don't worry too much. You know, if you're buying a group pot, you might think, oh, I never get them into that because they're quite deep. It's quite shallow, sorry. And don't forget, these have come out of nursery pots that were quite deep, but out of these nursery pots into a pot like this shouldn't be an issue for you. So I'm going to start off over here on the right hand side with some of these larger trees. And I think there was one, this was the one that we trimmed earlier. And all I've done with these trees, combed the roots out. I've given the tops of them a little bit of a trim, not excessively, but there's the odd little dead twig and I've just trimmed it out. The main thing when I'm planting this together now, I don't worry too much about the branches of the tree. What I'm looking at the trunk lines. because it's the trunk lines that are most important. The branches can develop over time and mature and get ramification on them, but I want the trunks all to look sensible. So this is probably my chunkiest, thickest trunk, tallest tree, so that's potentially a good first tree, a main tree. And there's another one here, look, similar sort of size, yeah, same sort of height, and I'm thinking that these two could work quite nicely together. And don't be afraid to put them quite close together. If they're going to live in this pot for years, we want to make them look like they enjoy each other's company. So I'm thinking this tree here, a front to you there, and a little bit of a lean from the left to the right. Now the movement of this tree, if we're going to lean it over, that dictates the movement of this group. So this group here has got direction and movement from the left, where the main tree is, over to the right. So for instance, something like this one here, and then this one here, and I might just turn it, might sink this one down a little bit deeper to get the height difference a little bit more obvious. And then this soil that we've got here, we can just bundle some of that on there and just sort of firm them in like that. Put a bit more compost on there. We'll get some ready in the scoop for the next section. And then let's have a look at some other trees and see what we've got. So we've got another one here. This has got a little bit of movement on the base of the trunk. And one of the advantages of doing group plantings like this is you can use trees that perhaps aren't good enough to be a tree in their own right, but collectively they work really well. So this is quite a nice tree, bit of movement here, and again movement from the left over to the right. So if I turn it around, obviously I'm working with the group towards me, then that might make another tree here. And this one, this main tree, I've planted about a third of the way along the group. The main thing with that is to not plant it too central. So that one, again, I'm looking at trunk lines as I do this. Yeah. So if I turn it round, you can see the front to you. I'm looking at trunk lines here and how these fit together. And from the side, notice they're not planted in a row. Yeah. You don't want to plant them too symmetrical and too regimented. We've got quite a lot of space at the back, so this is where my smaller trees are going to go. And I've also not planted too far forward in the pot. So back with the front towards you, stand out the way so you can have a look. If you start doing a group like this and you put 2-3 trees in the pot and they don't look comfortable together, then adding more trees doesn't normally make it look better. You're better taking them out and just starting it again. So back round with the front towards me, let's have a look what we've got. This is quite a usable tree. I'm wondering if we can utilise this. It's got this branch off to the right hand side, and maybe we can utilise that as a sort of a secondary tree to this one. Something like this. Wiggle it in there, and again pack some compost around it. And then now we've got, as we're building this, we've got too much on this side, so we need to build up this left hand side more. So let's see if we can do that. So we've got a few trees here that are suitable. This is quite nice with some branches. This is a bit more linear, but this has got a bit more width to it. So potentially this could go in on this side somewhere. And this has got a bit of a lean to it this way. Now we could have that, strangely enough, we could have that here, like this. Though these all moving this way, on the edge of a group, if this was the main dominant tree, as this was growing next to it when it was a young tree, it could have swung out to get more light and then straighten itself up. So potentially, we can utilise that on the left-hand side of this planting. Just shorten the roots back a little bit and see if we can't get it in here. Bring it forward of the first tree again, so we're not on the same line, and then a bit more compost like so, And what I'm looking for, you're always looking for difference. You're looking for difference in where you place the trees, not all in the same line. You're looking for the space between the trees to be different. You know, it's not like we're planting a commercial forest of trees where you plant them all, you know, 2 meters apart or something like that. We want it to look like a natural formed forest planting. So then I've got a few trees like this left. These are quite straight, a bit boring. So these won't really make like main trees, but these quite possibly could make like a filler tree. Yeah, could perhaps one of those in there. This is a bit of an ugly tree actually, to be fair, but it might work if we get it in there. Let's have a look. So I can take off some of these thick roots that it doesn't need. And we sort of bury it in here. We might be able to get that, the ugly base on this one won't really matter if we plant it down like that. And again, fill it in like that, firm it down. And again, working on a turntable like this, doing it at eye level is always easiest. You'll find it a lot easier if you've got the luxury of doing that. I'll turn it round. Yeah. So we've got 6 trees in here at the moment. Let's keep adding a few more. Perhaps we'll step down the size of trees and go down to these medium sized trees now and see if we can see what we can find in that selection. This one's a bit chunky. Might be able to use him somewhere. Got quite a few branches on this side, so potentially I could envisage that growing somewhere like this. Because if this was growing together as a forest, this tree on the edge has got more light, and that gives you a reason that these branches have grown out on this left hand side, and it'll frame this side of the composition nicely. So that's a potential tree for the left hand side of the group planting. So a bit of trimming of the roots, and then because we've got plenty of soil in here, we should be able to just sort of burrow a little bit of soil out the way and then place that in like that on that left hand side. Now you want to try to avoid planting a tree, you know, directly behind another. You want to try to avoid too many crossing trunks. But of course, the more trees you put in, inevitably, there will be the odd time where a tree sort of wanders behind another tree, and a little bit creates a bit of interest. So something like that. So we've now got 7. We've got 7, yeah. Hope you're counting along with me. We've got 7 in here. So don't get too hung up about how many trees we've got. Let's see what we've got now. This one could be sensible. We could do something with that. This one's pruning off just here. There's a little dead stub at the top, and that could prune off. And probably some of these medium-sized trees. Now we want something in here. See, that sits quite nicely there, look. If I turn it round so you can see. Yeah. So from the front towards you, you know, this works nicely in here with a bit of movement. The height of the tree works quite well. In fact, it's a bit perhaps a bit too rooty. There's a bit too much diameter of the root. So if we can trim that off, again, just take a bit of this soil out here. And it's a bit more difficult for me now because I'm doing it in reverse. But somewhere like that, let's just have a quick look from the front, leaning forward a little bit into here. That's fine. Spin it back round so you can have a look while I select some more trees. As we're selecting these trees, there's the odd tree that will be a bit difficult to use. We'll get down to the medium-sized trees here, and they tend to be this sort of thickness. But there's one here, look. Though it's a sort of medium or smallish tree, it's quite thick, heavy trunk, and that's going to look a bit more unusual next to this one. So that's potentially one that won't necessarily fit with these trees in this particular group planting. Now this is quite a nice twiggy tree. Yeah? This branch here is a bit too long, but if if I can get this one, this will work well in here, height wise. Perhaps just, let's have a look, see what it looks like. Just ease it in like that. Again, just fill it in with soil, then we can stand back and have a look to check we like it. That fills in a nice space behind there. We've perhaps got a bit of conflict between this branch and that one, so we can just snip that one off. We'll have a look at the branches in a little while. So let's see what else we've got. Perhaps they're a bit too small at the moment. This one's a bit big. We've sort of gone down from that size now. Let's have a look. Just want a couple more in this sort of area. So a couple, like maybe one just in here to fill in. And again, it's got some branches on this left hand side, so we'll put them facing out of the group, because that would make sense that they've grown out to the extremities to get some light. A bit more compost, like so. See what else we need. We need another one in here, another two in here maybe. See if we've got something suitable. This one's quite broad. It's a kind of a twin planting. You wouldn't use it as an individual tree probably, but it might give a bit more width, might give a bit more interest, and it will fill in at the back of the group planting. In here, fills in there quite nicely. It could live here. It could live here. Let's see which one looks more sensible. I think I prefer it in there. So let's just excavate that little space. See if we can wedge it in there at the back of the group, so we can see it from the front. So I'll have another look when I spin it round. He wants to go a little bit to the left, just there. And then something on that right hand side. So here's another one that's got a couple of branches, a couple of trunks on it. These are nice trees to fill in. Maybe a smaller one just in here. Quite like that just there. Maybe we'll put this one in here. Quite like that one just in here, just to fill this little gap in. And the canopy of this, when this is in leaf, you know, a canopy, the tallest part to be on the tallest main tree, and then this to drift down like a cloud down to this left hand side. So that will just sit quite comfortably in there. So let's see if we can get that one in just there. Just blow some of that soil out. Just tuck that one in there. Give it a little place to live. Move some of this compost across. This one's moved a little bit, let's sort him out. Okay. This one like this, this one like this. Once this starts to come together, we can spend a bit more time just going round, just compressing this soil a little bit more. Okay. So let's have a little look, see if we can add a couple on this right hand side. Just to fill in behind here. This has got a nice bit of movement. The height of this tree works quite well. If we can get this in maybe here. Or here. Maybe just here between there. Or here. Let's have it just there. Works quite well. It's nicely just there. Again, just filling with that compost. So another one little one there. That's quite short, but it's quite a thick trunk. So that's going to be a difficult tree to use. So we'll put that on the pile that we're probably not going to use. I'm just wanting a nice one to go behind this right hand section. Another little one in here. Go for one a little bit taller there actually, maybe a little bit taller. Pop him in there, that's a bit nicer. Put that one in there. And then that little one, that's just, we're still going to use him, but we'll put him further back. And again, like I said earlier, it's just about creating that depth and perspective with these trees, these plantings. Firm that in just there. Maybe a couple of smaller ones on this left hand side. Let's see what we've got. So something in here at the back of the group, just here, we're going to try and get a little one in there. We'll be able to squeeze him in under the roots of that other one. Bit more compost in there. Firm that down a bit. And here. What else have we got left? That one's no good. Little one here. Shorten the top of that down a little bit. It's not too difficult to make them shorter, but it's just harder to, if you've got a short one, to stretch it out a bit. So something like this in here. There's another surface root of that other one we put in, so I'll take a little bit of coaxing just to get it in to that position where we want it to be, that base. Just in here, firm that in. Really want that cutting across like that. Remove that section. Look at the top of the tree. So main tree here. So I'm just going to have a little go through it now, just firming it down a little bit. Again, starting with my main tree, just pressing the compost down. This second one that's living next to it, and when I'm doing this, we'll have a little bit of a twig trim while we're at it. Just take back some of the longer shoots we don't need at the top of the tree, and in here. That's those two. This one here off to this side. This one sits quite nice in there. So don't worry too much about the branches at this stage. I often just let these trees grow together for a year. Just let them all just sort of calm down and get to know each other. And then in a year's time, I can go in and trim the twigs and trim the branches a little bit more. I'm more concerned with the overall shape of the canopy of the tree and the movement and the placement of the trunks at this stage. So I'm just going to go around firming these root balls down. Okay, so I've firmed all these trees in. So next thing to do, a little bit of pruning. This top section here just wants to come back a little bit to here. There's a few other little stubs that we want to trim back on a few of these branches. A little bit here. This is growing up too much. Let me just turn it round to front towards me. This little bit here can come back. And I'm looking at the the height of the tree. A few of these sections at the top want to come back. There's a little stub in here that wants removing. Little crossing branch just here. So I tend not to get too bothered about the branches, but just a little bit of a neaten up on some of these sections. This will be in leaf within the next, well, probably in the next sort of 4 to 6 weeks. And obviously, because I haven't wired it in, this tree will be put into a unheated greenhouse here in the UK. So it's just going to keep it out of the wind, and I'll let it leaf out in an unheated greenhouse, kept quite cool. So we won't rush it or force it on. We'll just let it settle in, do its own thing, come into leaf. Some of these larger cuts that we've made on it, we need to put some wound sealant on them. So a little bit of wound sealant just applied to those, or cosmetically disguise them and make them look a bit less obvious. There was a cut at the top of that tree there, wasn't there? Another one here. Just go around and tidy up a few of those sections with some of this. These at the back where we took the top off to shorten the trees down a little bit, they can be done. There's another one up here wants doing, and I've just seen some sections that want pruning. This piece, this section, this little bit, and in here and here. And then if you look at the actual positioning of the trees and what we've done, the front towards you there. Now we're going to put some moss on the surface. It'll help sort of conserve the moisture, but it's mainly done for cosmetic reasons, to make it look more established and more finished. And most bonsai people will have a place where they go and collect moss from. I'm quite lucky because one of my neighbours has got a really good wall full of moss. He doesn't know it, he perhaps knows that bits of it keep going missing. So this was freshly scraped off his wall this morning under cover of darkness. So a little bit of moss, and we're just going to start placing this around the base of some of these trees. We're not looking to cover the whole surface in moss, but we're looking to sort of put a loose patchwork. And you want moss ideally that's been grown in the sun and shallow rooted moss, nothing too clumpy. You can't get moss that's been grown in the shade and put it on a tree that you're going to grow in the full sun, because it won't like the changing environment. But this is quite usable, so try and just piece it on a bit at a time into here. And then also it'll help keeping this in a greenhouse, because if we put this outside on the nursery, the birds will take all this moss off by tomorrow morning. So in the greenhouse it'll endure a little bit better. So a bit of moss around here like this, and it just sort of ties it all together. Round the back of these trees here, a little bit in here, and then we're also going to add a bit of akadama to the surface. So a little bit of this around the back of this secondary group, and some in here in the main group. If we can just squeeze some in. If you can't get in here, if it's quite difficult, you can use tweezers to put this moss in. If you can't get your hands in between these groups, it can be a bit fiddly. Look, another section in here, and there like that. At the back of here. And once this is watered, we can firm this moss down, and it will look more like it's been there for years. Section just here, through around this tree, and just like a forest coming alive. And when you're looking at this, it should be looking like a forest in nature. And the way I've assembled this forest. You know, it has direction, movement from the left over to the right. Got a majority of trees here. I've got a little gap through here. I don't want it to be a sort of a large gap in the middle of the forest. I want it to look cohesive, as if it is one group and forest planting. But I do find a little bit of gap here, to me personally, it just draws my eye into the composition, and it helps me imagine if I was sort of that tall and I was walking through this forest or whatever. And it just makes it look a bit more natural. So let's have a look from the front. A little bit more moss in here and in this section here. I say you can spend quite a good bit of time applying this moss. I'm trying to just do it fairly quickly for you right now. A little bit in here, and then a little bit of akadama around the edge possibly, just to tidy it up. So this little pathway in here, let's just brush a bit of this soil off, just tidy up that soil that we use, that compost. Take back a few of these roots, like so, and then some akadama, just carefully, as a bit of a finishing touch. Up to that moss. Round here into the front. This looks a bit pale at the moment, but akadama goes quite a bit darker once it's been watered. So the next thing with this is to lift it out the studio and give it a water, which will also help to settle the soil, moisten the moss, and it will also tone down the colour of this akadama and make it look less obvious. So a little bit of that in there, look, and just bringing it out onto the front to this apron here. That's just going to help to lead our eye into the forest. So you can imagine yourself going for a stroll in the forest like that. A bit more around here in this section. You see, it makes such a difference to the composition once you've finished. A bit of moss and some gravel or akadama just around the edge. And then just tidy it up like so. Just pat it down. So if I turn it round to you there, look, front towards you, and we put a nice maple group forest together in a relatively short space of time. So these trees are about 4 to 5 years old. How many did you say we'd used? You counted them, I didn't count them.
17.
17. We used 17. Cameraman's been counting them as I've been doing it. He's a bit better at counting than me. We've got 17 trees in here. A nice natural looking group planting. It will be on display at our nursery here in Nottingham, and I'm as excited as anyone to see this come into leaf this spring. Beautiful spring growth. Will look really nice against the colour of the bonsai pot. And now we're going to lift it out and give it a water. It's got movement from the left to the right. We'll trim the twigs a bit more next year, as we said, and also during this year as it grows. And we've tried to create a group planting that's got a nice canopy rising on this left-hand side up to a pinnacle, the apex here with the main tree, and then just drifting off carefully down to this right-hand side and away. Thank you very much. Okay, so now we've got our finished forest planting here of Japanese maple, Acer palmatum, all mossed and neatly potted. As we said earlier, it's now going to go into an unheated greenhouse, out of the wind, so it can just settle in and leaf out in spring. This is probably our longest video we've done to date, so thanks for sticking with us if you watched it all the way through. The actual putting the group together, I particularly wanted to do that in real time, so we didn't edit any of that. We just edited a little bit of me combing the roots out. So it's all done in real time for you to see and understand how a group can be put together, and to see how it's how the different trees mesh together and the composition completed like this. Please watch our other videos, give us a like, subscribe to the channel, and thank you very much for watching. Thank you.